January 12, 1945. The Rhine's cold wind cuts through the shattered villages of western Germany. Smoke curls from toppled chimneys, mingling with the acrid scent of burning timber and churned earth. Soldiers move cautiously between ruins, rifles ready, eyes tracking the distant silhouettes of Panther tanks lumbering over frozen fields. Their armor gleams faintly in the pale light, an unyielding wall of steel that has devoured every shell fired at it so far. A soldier crouches behind a broken wall, fingers tightening around a new shell, a silver-banded projectile, forged with a rare alloy, designed to pierce what had seemed invincible. Whispered rumors pass from man to man. Only a few of these rounds exist, rationed with near-religious discipline. Each shot carries the weight of hope and fear alike. The first shot is fired. Time slows. A sharp crack, a flash, a panther shudders under the impact. The ground trembles, eyes widen in disbelief. The war's most feared tank shows vulnerability for the first time, and the battlefield holds its breath. This moment will set the stage for a confrontation that will redefine armored warfare forever. By late 1944, the war in Western Europe had reached a critical impasse. The Allies had pushed through Normandy and liberated Paris, yet the German Wehrmacht remained formidable. Its backbone lay in armored divisions, spearheaded by the Panther tank, officially the Panzerkampfwagen V, designed to counter the Soviet T-34. The Panther combined mobility with heavy frontal armor. Its 75mm KWK-42L-70 gun could penetrate most Allied tanks at range, while its sloped armor design minimized vulnerability. Crews learned to trust the steel around them implicitly. To face a Panther head-on without specialized ammunition was often fatal. The Panther's development had been a tale of technical brilliance, shadowed by logistical strain. Early models, rushed into production, suffered mechanical issues, but by 1944, improved variants were fielded across both eastern and western fronts. In Western Europe, these tanks became the centerpiece of defensive operations. German commanders used them not only as offensive spearheads, but as psychological weapons, their imposing presence slowing Allied advances and shattering morale. Villages evacuated by civilians became frozen battlefields, the remains of the local population overshadowed by mechanized steel monsters. Allied forces, meanwhile, faced a growing dilemma. Standard artillery and tank rounds often failed against Panther armor. Reports from frontline units highlighted frustration and casualties mounting under their guns. Crews described shells bouncing harmlessly off sloped glacis plates, tracks destroyed, but the tank itself continuing forward. A juggernaut indifferent to infantry fire. The psychological impact was stark. Every failed attempt reinforced a sense of dread and helplessness, eroding confidence in conventional ordnance. Recognizing this, Allied engineers began experimenting with new solutions. Metallurgists and ordnance specialists collaborated to design shells capable of piercing Panther armor. By late 1944, after months of testing, the silver-banded projectile emerged. Its core combined hardened tungsten with a precision-engineered casing, capable of defeating frontal armor, at ranges previously considered unsafe. Each round was expensive, scarce, and required strict rationing to maximize battlefield effectiveness. Commanders had to decide carefully where and when to deploy them. Every shot carried both tactical and symbolic weight. Meanwhile, Panther crews maintained their rigorous routines. Each tank carried a complement of standard ammunition, alongside the rare high-penetration shells, often held in reserve for emergency engagements. Engineers and mechanics worked tirelessly to keep the vehicles operational despite harsh terrain, fuel shortages, and mechanical stress. The tanks moved with deliberate precision, their tracks carving deep furrows into mud and snow. Infantry units coordinated closely, aware that a single misstep could leave them exposed to Panther fire. The war had become a contest of patience, timing, and the careful application of limited resources. As the Allies advanced into the dense forests and river valleys of the Western Front, these dynamics created a complex battlefield environment. The interplay between Panther armor and Allied anti-tank solutions shaped strategy, forcing both sides to innovate constantly. The stage was set for an encounter where technology, human endurance, and tactical ingenuity would collide. where the silver-banded shell would confront the seemingly invincible Panther for the first time, changing the nature of armored combat forever. The Allies' response to the Panther threat evolved along multiple lines. Tank crews adapted tactics, learning to exploit angles, terrain, and coordinated fire. Infantry worked alongside armor, seeking weak points or flanking opportunities. Engineers developed specialized munitions, while artillery units refined indirect fire techniques to harass and immobilize the enemy. Yet until the introduction of the silver-banded shell, penetrating a Panther's frontal armor remained nearly impossible. Each failed engagement left units battered, and morale frayed under the relentless advance of German armored columns. The production of the silver-banded shell was a feat of engineering under constraint. Tungsten, the critical core material, was scarce. Factories rationed supplies, prioritizing the most crucial fronts. Each shell required precise casting, machining, and quality control. Even minor defects could render it ineffective. Training for its use was meticulous. Crews were taught optimal firing distances, angles, and targeting priorities. Commanders issued strict orders: fire only when success was probable, conserve ammunition, and coordinate with reconnaissance for maximum impact. The shell was not merely a weapon, it was a strategic asset. Field testing revealed its effectiveness. When properly deployed, the silver-banded shell could penetrate 100 millimeters of sloped armor at 1,000 meters, the range at which most armored engagements occurred on the Western Front. Crews witnessed the difference instantly. Panthers that had seemed invulnerable could now be immobilized or destroyed with a single well-placed shot. The introduction of this weapon demanded tactical recalibration from both sides. German crews began to respect its presence, reinforcing armor, adjusting formations, and relying more heavily on infantry support. For Allied commanders, every encounter required careful planning, balancing the scarcity of shells against the necessity of decisive action. By December 1944, the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, was underway. Dense forests, icy roads, and poorly maintained infrastructure compounded the difficulty of mechanized warfare. Panther units spearheaded German advances, moving in coordinated waves that overran lightly defended positions. Allied reconnaissance reported entire villages abandoned, replaced by advancing steel and fire. Mortar and artillery fire disrupted supply lines, but the Panther's frontal armor rendered most attacks ineffective. In response, specialized units carrying silver-banded shells were deployed at critical choke points and defensive positions, tasked with halting or slowing the German advance. The tactical doctrines surrounding the shell emphasized precision, rationing, and psychological effect. Crews knew that a single shot could turn the tide of a skirmish or save a unit from annihilation. The presence of these shells altered combat behavior. Infantry advanced with renewed caution, but also with hope. Tank commanders coordinated closely, sharing firing positions and calculating lines of sight. Intelligence officers tracked Panther movements meticulously, ensuring that the rare ammunition would be used where it mattered most. Commanders understood that these moments of decisive firepower could not be wasted. They had to align timing, terrain, and targeting perfectly. Winter's cold further shaped engagements. Snow muffled movement but reflected light off the metallic surfaces of tanks, revealing silhouettes at distance. Frozen ground affected traction, slowing both Allied and German armor. Visibility was often poor, forcing reliance on reconnaissance and aerial observation. In these conditions, the silver-banded shell's performance became even more critical. A single shot could penetrate at longer ranges, eliminating the need for risky close encounters. Its presence transformed the battlefield into a contest of skill, patience, and tactical foresight, rather than sheer brute force. By the time the Allies prepared for large-scale counterattacks, the stage was set for a confrontation that would define armored combat in Western Europe. Panthers, once symbols of invincibility, now faced a weapon capable of challenging their dominance. Infantry, artillery, and tank units coordinated like never before, blending human ingenuity with technological advantage. The first operational deployment of the silver-banded shell was imminent, promising a shift that would reverberate through the remainder of the war. The battlefield held its breath, poised between uncertainty and the potential for sudden, decisive change. For the soldiers on the front lines, the Panther was a looming spectre of death. Its 75mm gun could annihilate light armor and breach the sides of older Allied tanks with ease. Infantry units, often deployed ahead of or alongside armored divisions, lived with a constant awareness of vulnerability. When the silver-banded shell arrived, it carried not only destructive potential, but also hope. A single successful shot could protect entire squads, shift morale, and alter immediate survival odds. The psychological weight of carrying or firing one of these shells was immense. Soldiers balanced fear with determination, understanding that failure could mean death, while success might tip the scale in a battle already fraught with uncertainty. Crew members of tanks equipped with these shells trained extensively under simulated conditions. They practiced target acquisition, trajectory calculations, and coordinated fire under strict supervision. Each engagement required precision. A missed shot could squander a rare resource, forcing units to continue facing Panthers with conventional munitions. The silver-banded shell created a tension unlike any other. The responsibility of wielding near-invincible firepower while ensuring it was not wasted demanded mental discipline and emotional control. Allied tactical doctrine evolved to integrate the shell efficiently. Standard frontal assaults against Panthers were increasingly avoided. Instead, units employed combined arms maneuvers, infantry suppressed enemy positions while tanks provided cover, engineers laid obstacles to funnel armored units into kill zones, and reconnaissance identified weak points. The shell's ration supply necessitated careful prioritization. Commanders had to predict enemy movement, time engagements precisely, and choose targets that promised maximum strategic impact. This was not brute force, it was calculation under pressure, a chessboard of steel and fire. Battles were planned with granular attention. Firing angles were calculated to exploit frontal vulnerabilities, often in coordination with terrain features like ridges or narrow passes. Timing was synchronized with infantry maneuvers to prevent enemy escape or retaliation. Every shell fired represented a tactical decision with cascading consequences. The silver-banded shell was a culmination of metallurgical innovation. Its core contained hardened tungsten, encased in a specially tempered alloy capable of maintaining structural integrity at extreme velocities. The design allowed it to defeat the Panther's sloped frontal armor, a problem that had frustrated Allied engineers since the tank's introduction. Testing revealed optimal firing distances and angles, while field adjustments accounted for real-world variables, such as temperature, wind, and barrel wear. The shell's effectiveness was as much about precision engineering as battlefield execution, reflecting the intersection of science and war. Its scarcity emphasized its value. Each shell was produced under rigorous conditions, and quality control was non-negotiable. Faulty rounds could ricochet harmlessly, wasting both material and opportunity. Its presence reshaped battlefield calculations. Commanders and crews had to respect its limitations while leveraging its unmatched penetration capabilities. Commanders carried the burden of rationing the silver-banded shells. Decisions about where to deploy them were calculated down to the meter. High-ranking officers reviewed reconnaissance reports, analyzed enemy formations, and predicted Panther movement before authorizing a single round. Misjudgment could cost lives and squander a strategic advantage. Leadership became a delicate balance of patience, intuition, and tactical foresight. Every engagement required coordination. Artillery, infantry, and tank units had to move in concert to maximize the shell's impact. A commander's reputation and the survival of his men depended on flawless execution. Orders often emphasized restraint. Crews were instructed to withhold the shells until victory was highly probable. This imposed moral and strategic pressure on leaders, forcing them to reconcile the desire for immediate action with the necessity of conserving irreplaceable resources. The silver-banded shell transformed command from reactive battlefield decision-making into calculated orchestration. German Panther crews and commanders were acutely aware of the new threat. Intelligence reports suggested the Allies possessed a weapon capable of breaching their formidable armor. In response, Germans reinforced frontal plates where possible, adjusted formations, and relied more heavily on ambush tactics. They moved cautiously, coordinated with infantry, and attempted to identify positions from which high-penetration shells might be deployed. The psychological effect was profound. A tank that had been nearly invulnerable suddenly faced a mortal risk. Fear, uncertainty, and respect for Allied innovation altered both strategy and behavior on the battlefield. Rationing the shells introduced tension beyond the battlefield. Crews felt both the weight of responsibility and the pressure to succeed on a single shot. Soldiers internalized the knowledge that failure could cost lives and squander opportunity. The rare ammunition became a symbol of hope and fear simultaneously. Witnessing the shell strike a Panther transformed morale. It reinforced the idea that victory was possible even against previously insurmountable odds. Conversely, a missed shot could shatter confidence, emphasizing the fragility of battlefield fortune. The integration of human endurance, technological innovation, leadership decisions, and enemy adaptation created a multi-dimensional dynamic. The battlefield evolved from a contest of sheer firepower into a complex interaction of precision, timing, and psychological resilience. The silver-banded shell forced both sides to rethink conventional armored warfare. It was not merely a weapon, it was a catalyst for tactical evolution, reshaping engagements, morale, and command strategy alike. The convergence of these angles set the stage for the first decisive deployment. Soldiers, commanders, engineers, and enemy crews were now participants in a confrontation where human skill and technological advantage intersected. The battlefield itself became a theater of anticipation, tension, and imminent transformation. December 21st, 1944. The dense forests of the Ardennes were shrouded in frost and early morning fog. Allied forces moved cautiously along narrow, icy roads. Reconnaissance reports confirmed the approach of Panther-heavy German armored columns. Their engines rumbled through the trees, a low metallic growl that reverberated across frozen ridges. Infantry hunkered behind fallen timber and crumbled walls, eyes fixed on the silhouettes of tanks advancing with deliberate precision. Commanders issued final orders: conserve the silver-banded shells, deploy them where they would achieve maximum effect. The first engagement began near a ridge overlooking a frozen riverbed. A single Sherman crew, trained to deploy the specialized shell, prepared their shot. The targeting calculations were precise: distance, angle, wind, barrel wear, all variables accounted for. The round was loaded with the utmost care. The crew's hands shook slightly, tension visible in every motion. This was not a routine encounter. It was the culmination of months of preparation, anticipation, and technological innovation. The silver-banded shell fired with a sharp, echoing crack. Time seemed to stretch as it hurtled through the cold air, reflecting the grey light of dawn. Impact. The Panther shuddered violently, armor splintered, smoke erupted, and the tank stalled, tracks torn by the explosion. Infantry and nearby units watched in disbelief. The invincible enemy, feared for months, now lay immobilized. The ridge erupted in controlled chaos as Allied forces pressed the advantage, but precision remained paramount. Every shot had to count. German crews reacted swiftly, surviving Panthers' altered formation, attempting flanking maneuvers. Infantry support covered their withdrawal, but the silver-banded shell had forced an irreversible change. Commanders observed the battlefield, recalibrating tactics. Each subsequent shot, fired with calculated restraint, struck with deadly accuracy. Tanks that had once been impervious succumbed one by one. The engagement escalated as additional Sherman crews armed with the rare ammunition joined the fight. The forest echoed with the sounds of engines, explosions, and shouted commands. The battlefield became a chessboard of steel, each movement deliberate, each shot a calculated gamble. German forces attempted counterattacks, but the psychological weight of the silver-banded shell inhibited aggressive maneuvers. Fear now dictated their pace, forcing defensive postures and careful movement through exposed terrain. Artillery units coordinated with armored teams. Spotters marked Panther positions, relaying precise coordinates. Indirect fire harassed the flanks, forcing the tanks to maintain predictable lines where Shermans and their specialized shells waited. The interplay of reconnaissance, leadership, and technological advantage highlighted the convergence of all prior preparation. What had been an overwhelming German advance was now stymied by a single innovation, executed with meticulous strategy. Amid the smoke and frost, soldiers took note of human consequences. crews emerged from disabled Panthers, some injured, some surrendering. Allies secured the field with minimal casualties, a stark contrast to previous encounters. The silver-banded shell had not only physically neutralized tanks but psychologically shifted the momentum. Commanders now saw a path to reclaim terrain once considered lost, while infantry advanced with newfound confidence. The first decisive confrontation ended as the fog lifted. Destroyed Panthers littered the frozen ground, their silhouettes stark against the pale morning light. Allies consolidated positions, counted shells, and prepared for subsequent engagements. This moment, the first operational deployment, demonstrated the intersection of technology, leadership, and battlefield experience. The stage was set for further exploitation of the silver-banded shell's capabilities, as Allied forces pressed the advantage, aware that every remaining round was both precious and decisive. The morning of December 22, 1944, dawned cold and grey. The remnants of the German Panther column attempted to regroup along the frozen ridges, unaware of the precision waiting for them. Allied commanders deployed additional Sherman crews armed with the silver-banded shells at key choke points. Each firing position was selected to maximize line of sight and exploit natural terrain features, creating lethal corridors where Panther armor could no longer guarantee survival. The first shell struck as German tanks emerged from the tree line. Armor splintered under the high-velocity impact, forcing several tanks to stall. Crews scrambled to execute emergency repairs, but the combination of terrain, fire from infantry, and subsequent shells rendered most attempts futile. Allied artillery, coordinated with tank movements, hammered flanks and rear positions, preventing German withdrawal and forcing a tactical collapse. The battlefield became a tableau of precise destruction. Each shot of the silver-banded shell was calculated to neutralize the enemy while conserving scarce resources. Human response mirrored the tactical shift. Allied crews experienced a heightened awareness of opportunity and responsibility. Soldiers moved forward with deliberate caution, coordinating with spotters and fellow units. Morale surged with every Panther felled, a rare instance of psychological reinforcement in the midst of constant danger. Conversely, German crews were shaken. Reports later indicated an increase in surrender requests and retreat orders, a testament to the effectiveness of the shell and the calculated application of force. The Panther, once a symbol of invincibility, now represented vulnerability under disciplined opposition. The decisive nature of the engagement was further highlighted during the afternoon. A Panther platoon attempted a flanking maneuver along a narrow defile. Allied crews, anticipating this, prepared overlapping fields of fire. The first shell struck the lead tank, penetrating the glacis and immobilizing it instantly. The remaining tanks, exposed and restricted by the terrain, were systematically neutralized. Engineers accompanying the infantry detonated pre-positioned obstacles to hinder any armored advance. The combination of rationed silver-banded shells and pre-planned battlefield engineering produced a textbook execution of precision warfare. Commanders maintained strict control over the deployment. Each shell fired was accounted for. Rationing remained a strategic priority even amid the chaos. Observers noted the balance between destruction and preservation. Every engagement was optimized for efficiency and maximum operational impact. This disciplined approach amplified the effectiveness of the few high-penetration rounds available, transforming isolated tactical successes into a cumulative strategic advantage. By late afternoon, the battlefield bore the scars of mechanized warfare. Panthers, once advancing with terrifying confidence, were disabled or destroyed. The frozen ground was littered with twisted metal, and plumes of smoke marked each destroyed vehicle. Allied forces, though fatigued, consolidated positions and prepared for potential counterattacks. The tactical paradigm had shifted. German armored dominance on this sector of the Western Front was broken, and the silver-banded shell had proven its decisive value. This engagement had immediate and long-term implications. Field reports documented the first quantifiable successes against Panther armor, using the specialized rounds. Commanders revised operational plans, prioritizing future allocations of the shell for critical engagements. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. Allied confidence increased, while German tactical conservatism rose sharply. Soldiers internalized the lessons of the battlefield technology, precision, and strategic discipline, could overcome previously insurmountable obstacles. As the Ardennes skirmishes continued, the silver-banded shell became the fulcrum of armored warfare. Its presence redefined engagements, compelling both sides to adapt tactics, logistics, and command decisions. The first decisive deployment had demonstrated the full potential of this technological innovation. It was no longer a theoretical advantage, it was a proven weapon, capable of reshaping the outcome of engagements and altering the psychological calculus of armored combat. The battlefield, once dominated by near-invincible Panther tanks, now reflected the careful orchestration of human ingenuity, technological precision, and strategic foresight. Allied forces advanced with measured confidence, German formations retreated under new constraints, and the war itself shifted subtly toward a balance influenced by both innovation and disciplined application. The immediate consequences of the Ardennes engagement were stark. German Panther units suffered unprecedented losses, both in terms of material and operational capability. Field reports documented at least a dozen tanks immobilized or destroyed by silver-banded shells in a single morning. Crews abandoned vehicles, retreating on foot through the frozen forest, leaving behind fuel, ammunition, and essential equipment. The psychological toll on German tank operators was profound. The Panther, once a symbol of armored supremacy, had been rendered vulnerable by a combination of precision technology and disciplined Allied strategy. Allied forces took meticulous stock of their success. Commanders reviewed battle reports, noting the exact number of shells fired, targets engaged, and Panthers neutralized. The rationing of silver-banded rounds proved effective, no shells were wasted, and each engagement reinforced the strategic principle of precision over volume. Infantry and tank crews documented observations, noting how Panthers reacted to different firing angles and terrain conditions. These lessons were rapidly incorporated into training for subsequent operations, ensuring that knowledge of the shell's effectiveness spread quickly across units. The battlefield itself bore the marks of mechanized conflict. Craters scarred frozen soil, twisted armor littered narrow passes, and plumes of black smoke rose from vehicles left burning in isolation. Engineers began the arduous task of clearing wreckage to restore mobility, while medics attended to wounded soldiers. The contrast between the physical devastation and the strategic advantage gained highlighted the dual nature of armored warfare. Destruction and opportunity existed simultaneously, each feeding into operational momentum. Human response among Allied troops reinforced the tactical success. Morale surged as soldiers realized that a previously invincible enemy could now be neutralized with precision and planning. Crews felt a renewed confidence in their capabilities, understanding that disciplined application of technology could overcome fear and imbalance on the battlefield. Conversely, German reports indicated heightened caution among Panther crews. Retreats became more conservative. Offensive maneuvers slowed, and commanders increasingly relied on defensive positioning rather than aggressive armored thrusts. Logistical consequences were immediate. The scarcity of silver-banded shells required careful redistribution among Allied units. Forward depots prioritized distribution to key sectors, ensuring that critical engagements could exploit the shell's unique penetration capabilities. Commanders coordinated with ordnance officers to track supply levels meticulously. The strategic value of each shell extended beyond the battlefield. Rationing decisions now influenced operational planning and troop movements across the Western Front. The psychological dimension extended to leadership. Allied commanders recognized that their careful orchestration had achieved not only material gains but also a shift in the morale and behavior of enemy forces. German commanders, confronted with evidence that their most formidable tanks were no longer invulnerable, began adjusting doctrine. Panther formations were reinforced. With additional infantry support, armor improvements were hastily implemented where possible, and operational caution replaced previous offensive confidence. The Allies had achieved both tactical and strategic influence through a combination of technological innovation and disciplined application. Reports from intelligence units confirmed the broader operational impact. Documented losses of Panthers affected German deployment decisions in neighboring sectors. The presence of the silver-banded shell forced adjustments in German armored strategy. indirectly shaping engagements beyond the immediate battlefield. Allies anticipated further operational advantages, leveraging the shell's scarcity and psychological weight to guide offensive operations and defensive preparations alike. The battlefield, while temporarily secured, served as a vivid testament to the interplay of human decision-making, technological innovation, and disciplined execution. Soldiers, engineers, and commanders alike recognized the dual role of the silver-banded shell. It was both a tool of destruction and a catalyst for strategic adaptation. The broader implications of the Ardennes engagement quickly became apparent. Allied armored divisions, having demonstrated the effectiveness of the silver-banded shell, recalibrated operational doctrine. Panther heavy sectors previously considered nearly impervious were now approached with calculated confidence. Commanders integrated specialized shell deployment into every major engagement, selecting firing positions with precision and coordinating closely with reconnaissance and infantry units. The combination of tactical planning and technological superiority reshaped the dynamics of armored warfare along the Western Front. German forces responded with urgency. Reports indicate that Panther crews and commanding officers were compelled to adjust armor configurations, reinforce critical frontal plates, and adopt more cautious formations. Supply officers prioritized maintenance, anticipating that any additional vulnerabilities could be exploited by Allied technology. The psychological effect was compounded by the visible destruction of previously invulnerable tanks. Morale suffered, and aggressive tactics were often replaced by defensive conservatism. Panthers no longer advanced with the same audacity, and German operational planners had to reconcile with the reality that a single, rationed weapon could decisively influence outcomes. Quantifiable outcomes reinforced the significance of the shell. Field reports noted that in engagements over a 5-day period, silver-banded shells neutralized upwards of 20 Panthers in key sectors. Artillery and tank crews documented impact patterns, armor penetration results, and effective ranges. These observations informed subsequent operations, ensuring that tactical efficiency continued to improve even as supply limitations constrained availability. Allies demonstrated that a combination of precise technology, disciplined rationing, and calculated deployment could outperform numerical superiority. The engagement also shaped human perceptions of combat. Infantry units gained confidence, advancing with knowledge that previously impervious enemy armor could be neutralized. Tank crews internalized the importance of patience, coordination, and precise execution. Soldiers reported that witnessing the first successful impact of a silver-banded shell was transformative. It validated training, reinforced trust in leadership decisions, and recalibrated expectations of battlefield survivability. Conversely, German crews began to operate under a heightened psychological strain. Awareness of the shell's capabilities forced constant vigilance and altered traditional engagement strategies, introducing a level of caution that slowed operations and reduced offensive momentum. Operationally, the success of the silver-banded shell influenced broader Allied planning. Units were reassigned to sectors where Panther concentrations were heaviest, maximizing the tactical value of limited munitions. Commanders scheduled engagements to coincide with optimal environmental conditions, frozen terrain, limited visibility, and restricted maneuvering space, leveraging both terrain and technology to force German units into predictable patterns. The integration of precise intelligence, terrain analysis, and rare ammunition transformed limited battlefield opportunities into decisive engagements. Reports from engineers and ordnance officers highlighted the secondary consequences of deployment. Recovery of destroyed Panthers provided intelligence on armor composition and weaknesses, allowing Allied designers to further refine anti-tank strategies. Meanwhile, rationed use of the silver-banded shells created an operational culture of efficiency and careful resource management. Commanders emphasized that the shell was not a replacement for conventional munitions, but a force multiplier. Its selective deployment could shape the battlefield far beyond the immediate point of impact. By early January 1945, the cumulative effect of these engagements became apparent across multiple sectors. German armored divisions faced unprecedented operational limitations. Panther units were increasingly cautious, their tactical freedom constrained by fear of precise lethal ammunition. Allied forces, conversely, demonstrated improved operational tempo, exploiting both terrain and technological advantage. The battlefield dynamic shifted. Numerical parity no longer dictated outcomes. Careful planning, disciplined application of resources, and innovation dictated success. The Ardennes engagements with the silver-banded shell left a lasting mark on armored warfare doctrine. Tactical manuals, after-action reports, and officer memoirs would later cite these encounters as pivotal examples of how innovation, rationing, and precise execution could neutralize seemingly insurmountable threats. The stage was now set for reflection. The transformation of human, technological, and tactical interplay in these battles offered profound insight into the nature of modern warfare. The Ardennes engagements of late 1944 revealed a fundamental truth of warfare. Technological innovation alone does not dictate victory. The silver-banded shell, though a marvel of engineering, achieved its decisive impact only through careful rationing, precise deployment, and disciplined coordination among soldiers and commanders. Its presence transformed the battlefield from a contest of brute force into a theater of calculated precision, where human decision-making, psychological endurance, and engineering converged. For the men who fired it, the shell represented more than armor penetration. It was a measure of survival, strategy, and responsibility. Each shot carried the weight of both opportunity and consequence, demanding focus under conditions of extreme stress. For German crews, the experience redefined their perception of invincibility. The Panther, long considered the apex of armored warfare, became vulnerable not through overwhelming numbers, but through targeted innovation applied with discipline. The psychological shift rippled across units, influencing behavior, strategy, and morale in ways that no sheer quantity of tanks could achieve. Strategically, the shell demonstrated the power of adaptation. Engineers, commanders, and infantry coordinated in ways that amplified a single technological advantage into operational dominance. Rationing, previously a constraint, became a tool for strategic effect, ensuring that every shot contributed to cumulative success. The lessons extended beyond a single battle. Armored warfare, logistics, and battlefield psychology were all subject to the same principle. Careful application of superior knowledge and resources could overcome apparent imbalance. In a broader historical context, the Ardennes engagements underscored the evolving nature of World War II combat. The war was no longer defined solely by massed formations or numerical superiority. Innovation, integration, and discipline dictated outcomes. The silver-banded shell, while a physical weapon, became emblematic of this transformation. Its story is one of human ingenuity confronting mechanized might, of strategy shaping survival, and of precision altering the course of conflict. The battlefield, scarred by frozen mud, twisted steel, and shattered morale, stands as a testament to the interplay of technology and human determination. The Ardennes showed that even the most formidable instruments of war could be rendered vulnerable when innovation met discipline, and that the careful application of knowledge could redefine both the mechanics and the meaning of combat. The silver-banded shell was not merely a weapon, it was a turning point, a lens through which the evolution of warfare can be understood.